This is why you never go to the faraway dock. In 1994, an 11-year-old boy named Mark arrived at summer camp and made his way over to the dining hall where the director was going to talk about the next couple of weeks. The director emphasized no one was allowed to swim out to that dock located in the middle of the lake, but she didn't say why. Mark and his 3 friends were so excited about this faraway dock that when everybody was eating, they jumped on the lake and started swimming over there. When they finally got to the dock, there was no surprise to them. It just looked like any other dock. They try to make the best of it, so they climb on top and play the game where they all stand on one side until it floods. Last one to fall off wins. As the corner sank, they start hearing a scratching sound coming from underneath the dock. Suddenly, hundreds of these big meaty spiders start crawling out through the bricks of the wood and slide down the slanted dock towards the boys. The boys freak out, they fall forward, they got spiders all over their face and hair. Turns out the dock was off limits because it was overrun with dock spiders and the boys flooded their nest. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. A couple renting in the woods wanted a relaxing vacation. The first 3 nights they relaxed and enjoyed each other's company. Later that night, the husband is woken up by the sound of banging on the front door. He goes down and asks who it is, and the banging sound stops. On the next day, he decides to tell the wife what happened, and she wants to leave. They ran towards their car and tried to turn it on, but nothing happened. Unable to call anyone and miles away from help, they decided to wait it out. On the 9th night, it knocked on their bedroom door. When he opened the door, he saw this tall, pitch-black figure just watching him 10 feet down the stairs. Panicked, he stumbles down into the room and closes the door. The tall man opened the door. As the husband was getting ready to strike him with the axe, the tall man began screeching like something never heard before. The husband manages to strike him multiple times in the chest, though, before getting knocked down by the tall man unconscious. The last thing he remembers is the screams of his wife. He wakes up the next day and can't find his wife anywhere. The husband couldn't bear the loss, so he hung himself in the forest. Weeks later, his wife's body was found in the furnace with multiple axe wounds in the chest. Whatever you do, stay away from this hotel. On January 28, 2013, Canadian college student Elisa Lam checked in at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Her stay was to last 3 nights. During this time, Lam's known activity was very limited. She changed from a share room to a single. She visited a bookstore and returned to the hotel. Shortly after, she vanished. Her last sighting was on a security footage from one of the hotel's elevators, as she's seen acting erratically like she's hiding from someone or something. Lam started making strange hand movements, possibly to alert whoever might be watching the security camera. These were her last moments before her body was discovered in the hotel's water tank. To this day, it remains a mystery in how she got into the water tank and what made her do it. This is why you don't talk to strangers. In the early 70s, a college student hitchhiked his way home after morning class. A man pulls up to offer him a ride and he accepts. After telling him where he's going, the man drives past his destination. He asked him to turn the car around and the man declined. When the car slowed down, he jumped off and ran. A couple of years later at a cafe, he saw on TV the man who picked him up that day. His name was John Wayne Gacy, a captured serial killer who had later removed all his passenger door handles from his car. This is why you don't go to the woods at night. In 2017, a disturbing YouTube video was surfaced. A police officer in Saudi Arabia encountered what looks like an old lady in white. You can see the police officer scream in fear as she approaches him. At the end, the police officer drives away from the old lady. The video doesn't have much detail for this bizarre event other than describing the old lady as a witch. This history teacher manipulated his students and created a high school loyal army. In 1967, a California history teacher, Ron Jones, wanted to explain his class how the German population could have accepted the actions of the Nazi regime. Jones conducted a series of exercises in his classroom emphasizing discipline and community. This was intended to model certain characteristics of the Nazi movement. The students grew loyal to Jones and began recruiting hundreds of different students from other schools. They even had a security division consisting of high schoolers with personal bodyguards to protect Jones in the school. Jones would begin to feel that the experiment had spiraled out of control, so he told the students to rally for a special announcement where the movement would go nationwide. The day of the rally, he would disappoint them with the truth that this was nothing but an experiment, as he showed him a short film of Nazi Germany. This 15-year-old girl caught herself on fire after reading the newspaper. In 2018, a 15-year-old girl, Andrea Gomez, decided to play Ouija after watching it in a movie. She felt a cold presence behind her and thought it was just her imagination. On the following night, she began to have nightmares. She saw herself participating in cults of human sacrifices. Each passing day, the nightmares would intensify and she would be close to making her own sacrifice. On the 8th night, Andrea had a nightmare where she would be the one to sacrifice a newborn child. Andrea had a knife and she was told to stab the newborn in the chest, but she would not let herself do it. Suddenly, she feels a cold presence in hands forcing her to bury the knife in the child's chest. In the morning, she read the newspaper and ran to the nearest gas station where she would set herself on fire. The newspaper describes a crime where a baby was stabbed to death. Andrea realized that baby belonged to Maria, her best friend. If you see this while swimming, get out of the water fast. Here's why. In 2013, a 20-year-old man named Jacob Cockle was known as the Whirlpool Hitman. He loved swimming nearby whirlpools and recorded himself with a horse mask. One day, Jacob was swimming in a whirlpool nearby a Cornwall harbor, where he decided to submerge himself just underneath the whirlpool so he can get a good shot of it, and this is where he would unfortunately record his own death. This is the footage Jacob recorded below the whirlpool, knowing he was going to drown. Australia had an all-out war with the emus and lost. Here's what happened. In 1932, World War I retired veterans were given land by the Australian government. Over 20,000 emus migrated to Western Australia where they would consume and spoil the crops. The veterans pleaded to the government to take action in reducing the population of the emu. In October, they would lead an attack on the emus with a war major, a sergeant, and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. They called off the attack because it was raining outside. On November 2nd, they ambushed the emus, but the emus split into smaller groups led by a larger alpha emu and escaped. There were only a dozen birds killed. One suicidal emu ran into an armored vehicle's steering wheel, jamming it and causing them to crash. On the second attempt, they tried ambushing 1,000 emus in a local dam, but the machine gun jammed shortly after firing, killing just a handful of emus. The emus took 14 shots to kill, forcing the Australians to surrender to the emus. The emus would win the war, but only due to a lack of ammunition. Creepy unexplained sounds, part 2. In the late afternoon, a couple's truck broke down while it was towing a boat out a nearby lake. After no success in starting the vehicle, it was getting late, so the couple decided they would spend the night on the side of the road. In complete darkness, the man was awoken by the horrifying sounds of an unknown creature, and they could tell these sounds were coming from deep inside the woods. The man was worried nobody would believe him, so he recorded the event. Take a look.
Sounds closer to me.
This couple actually had a monster underneath their bed. In 2014, a couple returned home and found their room was trashed beyond belief. There was lotion on all the door handles. All their shoes had their inner soles ripped off, and there was a bucket of paint dumped on top of their toilet. They called the police, but the police could not find any evidence of a break-in, so the couple began thinking it was something paranormal. Moments later, the couple would call the police again, after hearing what sounded like a dying animal underneath their bed. What the police found underneath that bed is nightmare fuel. Coming from underneath the bed was a lanky lady high on meth holding a syringe and a kitchen knife. The police later determined she climbed a nearby tree and got in through the window. The officer tells them the lady had been scraping underneath the mattress trying to get to you. After this event, they would get a new mattress.
You would never stick around in a school library at night, and this is the exact reason. This picture was captured by Jalen Nell. She was in her school library, and this is the entrance point, and she's in there at like 2 something in the morning, and she thought she was completely alone. Until she realized that there was another woman in this library, and she was being watched. She ends up deciding to leave because she feels uncomfortable, but before she does, she takes this photo of the entrance to send to her friend and tell her about this creepy woman. But I want to look at this photo a little closer. In the frame, she had unknowingly captured the woman who was staring directly at the camera. This visual is chilling. Jalen would actually end up reporting this incident to Student Affairs, who then checked the camera footage at the entrance of the library. What really unnerved them is that when they looked at the footage, they never saw this person leave the library. And if you guys are loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. You guys had an intense reaction to the last photo I showed you, so I found you another one. This one, I feel like you might be able to immediately pick apart what's wrong with this picture. The sourcing on this is a little murky, although it's believed to have been captured at the Fall Ridge Academy boarding school for girls in the basement hallway. So the girl who took this picture, it's believed that she thought her friends were following her through this hallway, so she took the picture thinking it was a prank to send to the group chat, not realizing what she had caught. A sort of eerie presence that she was picking up on was of a man who was hiding behind this classroom door, and you can see his face in the window. And if we get even closer, you can really see those features in the window. She was attacked by the man shortly after this, and although it would be hours before she was found critical but survived, which is how we got a police composite. To this day, this still remains as the only visual of the person who was hiding in that basement. And if you guys are loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. I am telling you, doing night security, it's gotta be one of the scariest jobs. Okay, so this photo right here, this was captured by Michael Hostin on the 3rd floor bathroom of a Dallas shopping mall. The reason he took it was because he's night security and he heard noises coming from this bathroom, but he was nervous to check the actual stalls, so he sends a picture to his coworker. After he sent the picture, he eventually leaves the bathroom, but then gets a text where his coworker says, "Keep your weapon drawn and call for backup." He had no idea what he was talking about until he increased the brightness of this picture. It's not easy to see in the dark, but with the photo enhanced and slightly brightened, you can see somebody peeking over the top of that middle stall. Someone was in there looking directly at him as he searched the bathroom. But even with a visual, by the time backup eventually came, whoever this was, they were gone, and we were left with this picture. And if you're loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. I would preface this story that a photo like this is my actual worst nightmare. It's Julie Watts and her husband Jonathan, and on December 2nd, 2017, Julie was home alone when her phone pinged, detecting motion in the downstairs camera. This was the frame that was shown on her phone. Before we dive in, if you're a fan of true crime, make sure to go click the link in my bio to listen to my podcast, Creep Time the Podcast, on Spotify or Apple. She saw this photo and she immediately jumps into action. She locks her bedroom door, she calls 911, she starts texting her husband Jonathan, who's all the way in Minneapolis on business. After a few minutes, she gets another alert on her phone that there was motion detected in the downstairs bedroom. This was the photo sent to her phone. I know it's hard to see, but if you flip this picture upside down, it is somebody who is back crawling out of a closet. Julie did not survive this attack, as when police arrived, they came upon a gruesome display where Julie's hands had been taken. Police had no idea who could have done this. This was the final text exchange that was surfaced from her phone. What do you think makes this picture so disturbing to look at? This is a real photo of the Hiroshima shadows. It's the last trace of the exact spot where this person stood in Hiroshima, Japan. This is exactly as they were at 8:16 a.m. August 6, 1945, as the atomic bomb detonated over the city. It's like looking at their last moment here that's burned into the stone. Why even tell you this story? Why bring up a nuclear attack? Well, experts would tell us that the risks are rising, partly because of what you're using to watch this video. Literally as simple as a computer or your phone. Computers are vulnerable to these increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks, and as more and more computers are integrated into the worldwide nuclear system, they are also susceptible to cyber attacks. Even just technical errors have brought humanity to a nuclear brink in the past. And in today's cyber age, there's no telling when humanity's luck is going to run out. More people, elected leaders who can become aware of the threat of hacked nukes, the less likely we will ever see a picture like this again. Do you ever see a picture that just makes your stomach drop? This is a still from an alert that a woman named Alexis Randall got on her phone. It's from a security camera that was set up in her living room, but she's looking at this and she's thinking the same thing you are. She's like, what's wrong with the picture here? Why did the motion detector go off? But then look a bit closer, specifically at the bathroom door. This man, who was staring at the camera from the doorway. She spots this picture and she immediately panics and calls the police, but by the time they get there, this guy is gone. What really freaked her out even more is that when police got there, they found evidence that the bathroom window had been tampered with. Further security footage would show that the man had crawled through the bathroom window the night before and was hiding in the hallway bathroom all through the night, even while she was in the house. And if you guys are loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. And I genuinely mean nothing could give me chills like this photo. So this picture that I sourced, it came from the Elderwood Bed and Breakfast that's located in Louisiana, and it was taken by this woman right here, Meredith Den, and sent to her husband. It's the middle of the night and she's hearing things down the hallway, so she took this picture and sent it to her husband, not even realizing what she caught in the frame. But before we get into it, if you're not already, please make sure to go check out my podcast, the creepiest one you know, Creep Time the Podcast. I've got the link in the bio and it's available on Spotify and Apple. Now, in the background of this photo, she had captured something that most people find very difficult to explain. If you look to the top left of the photo, there is a figure that is watching her from the stairs. And it's not even clear from this photo if what she captured was an actual person who was watching her, because I feel like she would have seen them. But I don't know, the closer you get to this photo, the more unnerving it becomes, because it almost looks like somebody with their full jaw unhinged. What to you looks wrong with this picture? Before we get into this picture, I'm just going to preface that the woman who took this, Eliza Sherman, she was not harmed, but this was possibly the riskiest photo that she may have ever taken. After repeatedly hearing her doorbell rung, she assumed that it was probably a prank, like kids or something who were in her apartment building. While this woman was texting her husband and describing what was happening, she sent this picture of what she thought was an empty hallway, saying that every time she opens the door, there's no one there. Except she was wrong. In the dark at the end of that hallway was not a kid playing a prank, it was a man who had been ringing her bell. It's actually her husband who caught this, and he ends up calling it out. They call police, and they take the photo and they digitally enhance it. But even with a clearer visual, whoever this was, they do not know. He could have been someone who lived in the apartment building, he could have been someone who broke into the apartment building. And as always, if you're loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. Does something seem a little off about this photo? Danielle Berner, she's at work, her kids are at school, and she gets a ring notification saying that there was motion detected in her daughter's bedroom. It's like virtually impossible to tell that anything's even wrong with this picture. I couldn't even tell that there was something wrong with it until I looked at the bottom right of that bed. There's someone hiding under her daughter's bed. And unfortunately, she didn't catch this either, so she would end up coming home that evening after work. By the time her daughters got back from school, they were the first to find the remains of their mother. And even with this, a digitally enhanced version of the footage provided by police, they have never found who it was who was under that bed. And if you are loving Creep Time, make sure to go follow on Insta. Let's talk about this picture. Captured by a student athlete who was only publicly named in this story as Jason M. He was staying after school when he caught this in his high school hallway. He thought he was hearing noises in the hallway, that maybe a friend of his was pranking him, but he had no idea what he had captured. But before we get into this, a huge shout out to the sponsor of today's video, the podcast Civil. They're a duo that's focusing not on murder trials, but on civil trials that are taking place within the justice system. Catch them anywhere that you get your podcasts. Now, for the photo that Jason had captured, at first glance it looks like nothing but maybe a dark hallway, until he was found strangled and police turned to his camera roll. Cropped in, if you look to the far right of the picture, police believe that he may have captured his attacker, who they think was a woman, but her motive remains unknown. Witness reports of those who were near the school around the attack would link to this police sketch of the unknown woman. There were some digital trails found on Jason's phone that could have suggested he was in with a bad crowd, but this is the closest evidence we've got to a picture. Why is found footage always this creepy? If you don't know the story of Shannon Barlow and the footage that she caught, she was a pretty well-known documentary filmmaker in the early 2000s right outside of North Carolina. She very famously went into the abandoned hospital in City Center where she would film her last video. She never returned from that hospital, so police went searching and they found her camera and focused on the footage where they selected this frame. I looked at it and I'm like, why this frame? What is important about it? And if you look to the background on the right, you'll see it. In the right doorway of this hallway, there is a man who is watching her as she filmed this. Despite an investigation, her remains were never found, but there was evidence of a struggle, so it suggested that she didn't survive this. The enhanced video footage is the only visual that we have of who is believed to be her assailant. And if you guys are loving Creep Time, make sure that you go follow on Insta. Let's talk about this picture. Now, the picture was captured by Daniel Hill, who was the custodian at Driftville Elementary. If you look to the back of the photo, you can already kind of spot that something is very off. But the custodian had thought was maybe a student who had stayed after school and was trying to prank him in the dark turned out to be something much worse. Daniel Hill was attacked in that hallway and did not survive the attack, with his body being found the following morning by a student who was described to be found on the floor with lacerations so severe he no longer had eyes and his nose was missing. So police eventually turned back to the final photo that was taken on his phone to try to enhance it to figure out who would have done this. This was about the clearest version that they could make of that photo, and the man seen here was never found and his motive towards Daniel was never known.
This is how you spot a psychopath before they kill you. In 1995, Catherine Knight was a 40-year-old woman who grew up in New South Wales, Australia. Catherine grew up in a cruel, abusive household, which motivated her to try and build a family of her own. She had many failed relationships until one day she met a man named John Price. That year, Catherine moved in with John and his 3 young daughters, who got along with Catherine very quickly. One night, they got into a heated fight about marriage, where she grabbed a nearby knife and slashed John in the chest. He yelled at her to get out of the house as she stormed off. On the following night, John comes home from work and can't find his kids anywhere, but finds a note from Catherine. In the note, she explains where the kids are and how she wants to make up with them, so she would be back in a little while. John was not happy about this, so he waited for her in the living room. John waited until 11 p.m., then he decided to go to sleep. An hour goes by and Catherine walks in with lingerie. They start getting intimate with each other and fall asleep together. Catherine wakes up in the middle of the night and has a sudden sense of disgust. She thought John had taken advantage of her, so she would teach him a lesson. She got on top of John and stabbed him in the chest. John, in adrenaline, pushed her off of him and ran. He quickly bled out and fell on the kitchen floor. She proceeded to make different dishes with his body and planned to feed the kids her father. When she realized what she had done, she tried overdosing on sleeping pills. Thanks to John's co-workers who were worried for him and contacted the police, they were able to make it to the scene and save Catherine. Catherine will be the first person in Arizona history to be sent to life in prison with no parole. You would not believe this story if it wasn't for this video. In September of 2018, a young woman named Sandra Gonzalez left to work at around 10 p.m. Her boyfriend, Anthony Castillo, was to take care of her 2-year-old baby, Fabiola Rodriguez, for the night. Anthony physically abused Fabiola until she stopped breathing. He would go on to call 911 hours later at 3:19 a.m. Fabiola would unfortunately pass away and be buried in Masonic Cemetery in Las Cruces. Sandra suspected that her ex-boyfriend Anthony was vandalizing Fabiola's grave, so the family set up hidden cameras to see who was responsible. What they captured will shock you. In the footage, a little girl can be seen walking along the side of a tall man. Sandra believes that the tall man and her daughter were crossing over onto the other side. This is why you may get a call from the afterlife. In 2010, a husband died, leaving the wife alone in the house. A couple of days later, the woman began calling 911 for basic mundane tasks. The dispatchers were respectful of her since she was showing clear signs of dementia. They tell the woman, "You cannot call unless it's an emergency." She eventually understands, apologizes, and hangs up. Shortly, the woman called. Thinking it was her deceased husband, she asked, "John, where are you?" 911 would tell her respectfully not to call unless it's an emergency and to call her family. She called again in distress, asking John to please help me. This time they would send first responders out to her house. They found a woman upstairs and she had recently passed away, but the calls continued. She would continue to call for help multiple times a week, and each call she did had a unique conversation. Police began contacting the phone companies, checking her house, anything they can think of to try and figure out who is making these calls. The house was broken into and burnt down, yet the calls continued for well over a year. They did, until one day it suddenly stopped. Stop leaving your doors unlocked. This is why. On June 10th, 1912, Josiah Moore, Sarah Moore, and their children were fast asleep upstairs. They lived in a small town in Villisca, Iowa, which was considered a safe and friendly town, so they left their front door open. At midnight, a mysterious man entered through the unlocked door and he was holding a lamp and an axe. The man made his way up the stairs, crept past the room with the children, and into Mr. and Mrs. Moore's bedroom. The man took the keys to the house and left, locking the door behind him. On the next morning, the house was unusually quiet, so the neighbors alerted Joe's brother, who arrived to have a look. What he saw after letting himself in with his own key was straight out of a nightmare. Everyone in the house was dead. All 8 of them were bludgeoned beyond recognition. In 2014, a paranormal investigator stabbed himself after spending one night in that house. Tours to the house have been cut short by children's voices and flying objects. Today, their home is considered one of the most haunted houses in the country. This 17-year-old was a World War II hero. In 1943, Lipa Radek volunteered to retrieve wounded comrades from the battlefield. Joining her battling comrades, she would be captured by Nazi forces. After 3 days of torturing Lipa, she would not give up information. Nazis were frustrated and sent her to death by hanging. She was marched down to a gallows in public view where she would be hanged. A Nazi commander gave her one more chance to give up information of her partisan comrades. She passionately responded, "I am not a traitor of my people. Those whom you're asking about will reveal themselves when they have succeeded in wiping out all you evildoers, to the last man." Here's a photo of Lipa after she told the Nazi commander her comrades were going to kill him. This haunted mind will keep you awake at night. In 2013, a middle-aged man named Frank went to a small town in Nevada called Kingston. After 300 videos of mine exploration, the Horton mine in Kingston would be the one to take a dark turn. Here's what happened.
I'll go a few feet further in and check it out, but I think I'm going to pass on this one. Here's a shot looking back towards the entrance. I'm a little bit further in. I don't know why that one chain is swinging back there. Don't know if you can see that in the video or not.
After this video, Frank would never return to the Horton mine again. Frank has stated he has no reason to fake this video. What do you think? This 10-year-old girl killed a 6-month-old baby while he was at daycare. In 2018, a man named Nate dropped off his 6-month-old son Jackson at daycare. Amber, the daycare owner, had a 10-year-old foster daughter whose name is not known. One day at 3 p.m., Amber's daughter had arrived from school and was advised to play outside with the other foster kids, yet she disobeyed and stayed inside. She saw Jackson napping and felt an urge to hold him. She picked up Jackson and accidentally dropped him. Initially, Jackson was okay, just very upset and crying. The girl was worried she would get in trouble, so she panicked and started stomping on Jackson's head multiple times. Jackson was rushed to the ER, but unfortunately, he would later pass away in the hospital. Jackson's father, Nate, took her to court where she would be judged as an adult. The girl was later sent to a mental institution.
If you want to see something freaky, we'll take a look at some old footage. This is from the Theodore Brill's assisted living community, and it's security footage from back in the 80s. This camera would just kind of generally face this hallway, but one night it caught something very eerie in this particular frame. Before we get into it, I have got to say thank you to you for making my podcast, Creep Time the Podcast, number 18 in the whole country. I'm very grateful. So if you have not listened to Creep Time the Podcast, go click the link in my bio. If you look to the background of this footage, on the right there appears to be an elderly woman just standing there. What really kind of freaked everybody out is that everybody recognized this woman. The staff could tell that this was Blanche Raymond. The problem is, Blanche Raymond died 2 years earlier in 1984. Still, the consensus from the staff is that the footage clearly shows who they recognize to be this woman. Just feasibly no explanation for it. How do we explain this footage? Let's talk about this picture. It was captured by Amanda Clark in 2017 when she was walking by the window of her ski cabin and she saw what appeared to be a man staring back at her. I'm just gonna say a huge shout out to today's sponsor of this video, Solo.to. Solo.to is like your one-stop shop for linking your socials, your website, anything you want right in your bio, and I've been using them for like well over a year at this point. I think their linking service is like the #1 driver for Creep Time the Podcast, so definitely check them out. Now, that photo that Amanda captured was sent directly to her boyfriend, saying that there was this man trying to stalk the cabin. However, she was gonna run into the same issue she would with trying to call 911. There is no service in the mountains. She could sense there was something deeply wrong with this situation. The man was just staring at her through the window. She had no idea what his intentions were, until he darted towards the house and tried to pry open the downstairs window. Luckily, he never got in, and the boyfriend did eventually return. They contacted police, and that's how we got this sketch. But that man was never caught. I already know this video is going to show up at night for you. I don't care. You tell that there is something deeply wrong with this photo. It was discovered in a hidden lockbox after her grandfather had passed, and the woman who found it, Michaela Jerome, she thought the same thing that you did. There's something that's kind of off about this picture. Very quickly, if you're not already, make sure to go check out my podcast, the scariest one you know, Creep Time the Podcast. Can use the link in my bio. We're on Spotify and Apple. Well, the photo, she was almost sure, clearly showed the staircase of her family home, but she couldn't be sure about what this was in the center until she enhanced the photo. A hauntingly clear image of what appears to be a woman clawing her way up those stairs. She eventually turned in this photo for analysis with the police, and it took them 4 months, but they determined that this was more than likely a scenario of captivity. If her grandfather did take this picture, he had this woman in his possession. Still, nobody would even know who she was. Let's talk about this picture. So this is a still that was actually captured from video footage that was taken by Project Ghost Town, and if you look at the top of the staircase, you'll notice there's something wrong with the photo. But to bring you this episode of Creep Time, I am partnering up with Spyfly. This is the site for running background reports. If you're getting insights for safety purposes, property, or even reverse phone lookups, Spyfly is perfect for vetting first dates, even if you want to reconnect with long-lost loved ones. Make sure to check the link in my bio, sign up for Spyfly today. This group, they went to go visit a town called Demeril, which is really infamous because back in the day, everybody left this town on the same day. Nobody ever knew why. While exploring abandoned houses, they started taking video and caught this. They looked at the footage and they looked at the top of the staircase and realized what they had caught was an unknown face. Despite them claiming they searched the house and they were sure they were alone, the footage has largely gone unexplained. Is a haunting the reason everybody left Demeril back in the day? A question that has long plagued police is, what do we make of the McGrady tapes? So back in 2001, at a Blockbuster in McGrady, North Carolina, a car drove by in the parking lot and just dropped a tape outside of the building. So employees saw that and they went outside to get the tape and they were like, who would drop a tape off like that? Until they looked at it and they noticed something was wrong. This was the tape that was recovered from the parking lot and it was completely unlabeled. According to the story, they took it to the back room where they were able to play it back, and this was the footage they found. It is a 40-minute video of a person's face looking under what looks like a bathroom stall, and it's completely silent, like straight uncut 40 minutes of this and the cameraman just breathing heavily while they videotape this. Management turned the tape over to police, and the strangest part is that a search canine signaled that the tape had traces of human decomp on it. To this day, whoever's behind the McGrady tape is a mystery. The strangest feelings that I can imagine is just feeling like your reality isn't very real. There's a very strange event that took place in Duluth, Minnesota in 1988 where every single TV in this town turned on by itself at the exact same time. This was the image that flashed on the screen for exactly 4 minutes. It did move, and what's even eerier is that it actually spoke and would repeatedly say it was stuck between realities. It happened in like every single household, and it was quick, but there were some people who were able to get pictures of their screens. At some point, everybody thought this was some kind of elaborate prank until this happened. State troopers and government officials came into Duluth and privately removed TVs from almost every household and then compensated everybody, and nobody really knew why. State officials would eventually claim this was for security reasons, but a lot of people questioned, was this a prank? Or was this something else?
This is why you should always sleep with your lights on. In 1991, a man named Christopher Case was found dead in his bathtub, fully clothed in the fetal position. When police interviewed his best friend Sammy, she told them about a very disturbing phone call she got from him the night before he died. On the call, he told her that on the previous night he had been woken up to what sounded like whispering coming from underneath his bed. When he turned to look, he couldn't move. As he laid helplessly, he watched a black figure pull itself out from underneath his bed. Once it was fully upright, it reached down and began stroking him until he passed out. The next morning when it came to, he felt his neck and it was swollen and bruised. Then he saw there was blood on his hands, and he saw there were deep uniform incisions on each of his fingertips. As he's saying all this to Sammy and telling her how scared he is to go to bed that night, he suddenly stops and says, "I hear whispering outside my room," and then the phone went dead.